First chapter, A Quiet Evening. It was a cold evening in New York City. The streets of Manhattan were still bustling despite the late hour, filled with yellow cabs, distant honking, and the chatter of pedestrians. 18-year-old Barron Trump stepped out of an upscale cafe, adjusting his hoodie in an attempt to go unnoticed. He had always preferred staying out of the spotlight, but his last name made that nearly impossible. No matter where he went, people whispered, stared, or pulled out their phones. His security detail followed at a respectful distance, giving him some space. He took a deep breath, enjoying the moment of independence. The city lights flickered on the wet pavement, and for a brief moment, he felt like any other young man walking through Manhattan. But then he heard something, a loud clatter, followed by an angry voice. Second chapter. The first tension. Across the street, a sanitation worker was aggressively knocking over trash cans, clearly frustrated. The older man, dressed in a neon vest and worn-out gloves, grumbled to himself as he slammed his broom against the pavement. "This damn city. Same story every day," he muttered. "We clean up after the rich while they walk past like we don't even exist." Barron was about to ignore it, but just as he crossed the street, the man turned and locked eyes with him. His gaze immediately fell on Barron's expensive sneakers and high-end clothing. His expression hardened. "Hey, kid," the man called out, his voice rough and accusing. Barron slowed his pace. "Me? Yeah, you. You one of those spoiled kids who's never had to lift a damn finger in your life." Barron sighed, already sensing where this was going. "I don't know what you're talking about." The worker scoffed. "Oh, I think you do. Rich kids like you walk these streets with your designer clothes, your bodyguards, your fancy apartments, and you don't even see the people who keep this city from falling apart." Barron knew he could just walk away. He had been in enough public confrontations to know that arguing never helped. But something about this man's frustration made him stop. "I see you," Barron said. The worker laughed bitterly. "Yeah? And what do you see?" Third chapter. Recognition and resentment. Barron hesitated for a moment before responding. "I see someone working hard, someone who feels like they're not being noticed or respected." The man's eyes narrowed. "What's your name, kid?" Barron exhaled. He knew the moment he said it, the situation would change. But he wasn't going to lie. "Barron." The worker's expression shifted instantly. His mouth tightened, and his grip on the broomstick grew firmer. "Trump's kid?" he said, his voice now edged with something deeper, resentment mixed with curiosity. "You gotta be kidding me." Barron braced himself. He had heard this tone before. "You know how many extra shifts I had to work because of your dad's policies? You think he ever thought about guys like me while making his decisions?" Barron felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. He had been judged for his last name his entire life. People always assumed they knew who he was, what he stood for, and what he believed, without ever speaking to him. "I didn't choose my last name," Barron said, keeping his voice calm. "And I'm not my father." Fourth chapter. The Growing Crowd. The worker let out a dry laugh. "Of course, that's what you'd say." By now, a few people had gathered. Some recognized Barron and began whispering. A few even pulled out their phones, recording the encounter. "People like me," the worker continued, "break our backs to keep this city clean. We breathe in the garbage, work through the heat and the cold, while kids like you get handed everything. And don't tell me you don't, 'cause the world works differently for people like you." Barron sighed, glancing at the growing crowd. He knew how this looked. A rich politician's son arguing with a working-class man on the street? The internet was going to have a field day, but instead of reacting with anger, Barron bent down and picked up one of the overturned trash cans. The crowd murmured in surprise. The worker frowned. "What the hell are you doing?" Barron set the trash can upright and dusted off his hands. "I'm saying I respect what you do, and I get that it's hard." The man blinked, caught off guard. "You don't know a damn thing about my struggle," he muttered, but his voice lacked the same bite as before. Barron looked at him directly. "You're right, I don't. Just like you don't know anything about mine." Chapter 5. A Message in the Chaos. For a long moment, the two stood there, the tension lingering in the air. The crowd was still watching, cameras rolling, waiting for something dramatic to happen. But instead, the sanitation worker exhaled, rubbing his forehead. Maybe I judged you too quickly, kid. Barron nodded. Maybe I get that a lot. The worker let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. You're not what I expected. And you're not either, Barron replied. The crowd slowly began dispersing, realizing there wasn't going to be a big fight. Some people still whispered, but Barron didn't care. He wasn't interested in making headlines. He was just trying to be understood. Sixth chapter, the viral aftermath. By the next morning, the video of the encounter had gone viral. Headlines ranged from Barron Trump faces off with NYC worker in heated exchange. Barron Trump shocks bystanders with unexpected response. Class war on the streets of Manhattan. Some praised Barron for his calm approach, saying he handled the situation maturely. Others dismissed it as a staged moment for good PR. The internet, as always, was divided. But for Barron, it wasn't about the headlines or the social media reactions. That night, as he sat in his apartment, staring out at the city lights, he thought about the sanitation worker. He thought about how quickly people judged each other, how assumptions created walls between them. And he realized something. If people actually took a moment to talk to one another, really talk, not argue, not assume, maybe the world wouldn't feel so divided. Maybe, just maybe, understanding started in the smallest, most unexpected places.